Hello, I want to welcome you to the Power of Our Story. We are a place of safety for our protectors. Please feel free to reach out to us if you'd like to join any of our groups. We are here, we connect through storytelling. And today I'm so thrilled that we have Chris Gregorio facilitating the talk today. So I'm going to hand it over to him to introduce our guest for the day.
Thank you, Sarah. I really appreciate that. Good morning, everybody. My name is Chris Gregorio. I've been in law enforcement for just about 20 years in the Pacific Northwest. And today we're going to talk about and have on Lieutenant Marc Garth-Green talking about leadership. And oftentimes in these leadership conversations, we talk about all the highlights. And one of the things that makes great leaders is the vulnerability and self-awareness to talk about their failures and the humps that they've had to go through to become such great leaders. And in my time of 24 years in the military and 20 years as a police officer, I don't know that I've ever served with, for, and alongside a better leader than Lieutenant Marc Garth-Green. And he is one of the most vulnerable people and self-aware and self-reflective individuals and leaders that you'll come across. And I think that his methodologies would help so many people. And we'll probably dive into this a little bit, but a little bit of a difference between management styles and leadership styles and the importance between the differences between the two. So again, I've worked with Lieutenant Garth-Green for just a little over 20 years, and I'll let him tell the rest of his story and how he got to where he's at. Lieutenant?
Oh,
thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks for having me. Thank you, everyone, for being here and present. And so I'm going to start kind of in the beginning for me, because it kind of sheds some light on actually how I work and what I believe. So I was born in Durban, South Africa, and this was during the time of apartheid. And there was a lot of unrest, a lot of issues within the country. And my mother kind of worked in the government, but not really exactly for the government, and supported equal rights and the ANC and other things along those lines. So we were in trouble a lot. I say we as a family, but mostly her, for kind of the things that she was doing. There were things where if your gardener or your housekeeper, they could only have their children come and stay with them for 2 weeks out of the year. And that was it. That's all that was allowed at that time. But during our holidays, we would just have all the kids there and we would all just play together. So our neighbors would spy on us and call the police on us for breaking the rules all the time. So we were constantly in a little bit of trouble for that. And my parents firmly believed that apartheid was wrong, did everything they could in their own sphere with that, but found that they didn't want to raise a family in that environment anymore. So back then there was a restriction on leaving the country and all sorts of things along those lines. So they ended up basically selling and giving away everything that they had, their house, their furniture, all of these types of things. And we could only come out of the country with $10,000. That's all the money you could leave with on vacation. So we came to America on vacation, and then stayed. Fortunately, my father's sister, she had married an American doctor, and she was living in San Francisco and working as a nurse there. And so when we had immediate family in the country, so we were able to apply for citizenship and ultimately got our U.S. citizenship with that. And then it was always just kind of really pushed into me, service to your country. You know, your country's given you a lot. And so you're beholden to not only the country, but you're beholden to the ideals of the country. One of the early things on, and I've done it with my kids, is when we turned 18 and were able to vote, we would sit down and discuss voting. And my parents would always say, look, so many people across the world have died just for the right to vote. This is your duty. This is how you honor those people, and to do those types of things for that. So we would do that. My father had been in the military. My grandfathers were in the military during World War II. So it was just kind of a thing that naturally kind of happened. And so my older brother, he joined the Navy. And then when I was old enough, I actually joined the United States Marine Corps and then enlisted and spent 4 years in the Corps and loved it. But to me, the decision point at the end of my time frame there was I saw a lot of my folks that I worked with that had children while they were gone. Um, they had a lot of things going on at home where they couldn't, necessarily help out with. And for me, I just wasn't willing to accept that. So I ended up leaving after 4 years. Because to me, it's either 4 or life. Because once you hit 8, you're almost to 10, so you're halfway. So why would you quit, right? So you would just continue through and to move on that way. But I did my time there. Was in Desert Storm. Went to the Philippines to dig out Mount Pinatubo when that erupted on a humanitarian mission out there. Um, like I said I got to do a lot. Was stationed in Naples, Italy for 18 months at a security force company out there. I really enjoyed my time in. There's always those negative things, but overall, for me, it was a very positive experience with that. So I left there, came back to the States here and moved back to Seattle. Met my wife. She runs really fast, but can't do really well. So she ran to Florida, and I caught her there when she hit the water. And so we moved down to Florida for a couple of years, and I started my career down there with Pasco County Sheriff's Office. We did about 4 years down there, and decided we wanted to start our own family. But we needed to come back to where the family was to get that support structure. And she's actually from Canada, from Eastern Canada, but we moved back to Seattle where my family was from. We had 2 children. My daughter is 22 and in college, just graduating this year. My son is 20 and he's playing soccer and working restoring cars. Full time. So he's got a great gig and loves that. My wife's a nurse, and funny, cops and nurses, right? We always kind of seem to pair up. Um, so that's kind of where we're there. So I joined the Seattle Police Department back in the day. And I've been here now, oh gosh, over 25, 26 years or so with it. So I started out working patrol initially, and then I went to an anti-crime team, which is a lot back then was plainclothes, street level vice and narcotics mostly. We served search warrants, did a lot of tactical stuff as well. Uh, and then I went from there to the SWAT team. So I was on the SWAT team for about 4 years. Enjoyed that, but I really missed policing and kind of making that difference out there for folks every day. And so I decided I'd go back to patrol. So I went back to patrol for a while. Was promoted to sergeant, and then I was given my own anti-crime team to run. So I ran that for about 4 years, and then I went back to patrol again. As you can see, there's a theory here of every 4 to 5 years I have to go back to patrol, back to my roots, where I go. Was promoted to lieutenant, was a watch commander and an operations chief, and then the commanders came to me and said, "Hey, you've done all your time pretty much in patrol and patrol-related functions. You should really go to the detectives, and we have this opening in our robbery and gang unit." And I said, "Wow, that's really great. I really appreciate you thinking about me for that. But I just have only had this job right now for 6 months that I'm in, and I really should learn, uh, to do the job a little better." And I had a really good commander. He says, "That's really good, Mark, but you don't understand. I have this opening in the robbery and gang section, so you're going there." And I was like, "Okay, I got it. Yes, sir." And so I spent a couple years running the robbery and gang unit, and then I was promoted to assistant chief, and really because I worked Fridays. That was really it. The chief would always call me and she'd say, "Hey, Mark, I know it's not a robbery or a gang issue, but you're the only one here on Fridays, and I need somebody to take care of these issues for me." So that's why I was promoted in my mind, was because I worked Fridays, and nobody else did, or very few others did. So I was the assistant chief of the Criminal Investigations Bureau for about 11 months. And then I was promoted to the deputy chief position, and did that for about 18 months. It was not a good fit for the boss or me. We came at things from two very different directions, and had two very different styles. And she really deserved to have somebody more in line with her way of thinking, to kind of champion some of the things that she needed. And so really she demoted me. You make it nice and like, oh, they've agreed to go back, but really what ended up happening was she called me. Well, she didn't call me. I was called by our human resources section, and they said, hey, we'd like to meet with you. And I said, well, I'm going down to teach a class on leadership right now. Can I come in a little later? And they're like, well, we really need to meet with you right now. And I said, oh, I said, I guess I'm being demoted, right? And they were like, yeah. And I said, okay, no problem. I said, I'm done by noon. I'll be up to your office at noon. I said, patrol, the third watch, watch commander position's open. That's where I want to go. I'm not trying to go to any, soft landing, I guess, if you want to call it, or special. It's like, I'm going back to patrol, what I like. And so I said, hey, great, no problem. I'll go back there. And so I went back to patrol. I loved it. Spent a couple of years, a little over 2 years back in patrol. And then they came to me and said, hey, we're moving you down to the harbor unit. So I've been down in the harbor unit now, goodness, almost 2 years, coming up on 2 years in a couple months. So I've done a lot of things within the department. I've had a lot of great opportunities. I have no bones about the fact that I was demoted. I had more issue with how it was done than that it was done. I firmly believe in those kinds of positions, CEOs, COOs, all those, kind of more higher level positions. They're generally temporary, right? And so you have to kind of go into those jobs knowing that, hey, this is going to end at some point, right? Whether it be, a new CEO comes in and they want their own COO, or a new chief comes in and they want their own person, right? To champion their ideas with them. So I always think about those types of things, that everything's kind of transitory, everything's kind of temporary. And so you shouldn't be too surprised that someday where it comes down and it's not done. And I had told both the chiefs when they promoted me to assistant chief and then to deputy chief, I said, I've worked small teams, I've worked special ops stuff. There comes a time where it just doesn't work any longer. And so I would say, just come to me and tell me, I'm not throwing my sucker in the dirt. There's no issue with it. It just didn't work. It doesn't work. It's no longer working. And so I think we have to have that mindset of understanding skill set and what's needed at those times. And then when you're no longer needed, you have to accept that fact and then move to something else. And it's not that you're not needed in the world or your business or anything along those lines. It's just simply that it's not the right time and the place for you. That position isn't the best for you at that point. And so, where can you make an impact? I think my biggest impact, honestly, to the department where I work is simply in patrol, is being out there with our folks. And so, moving back to me wasn't any real big deal. Now there's an ego hit. There is absolutely, I'm not going to lie and say, oh, it's the greatest thing in the world. Because no, hey, because I look at it as a bit of a failure too, right? And not having failed in my life. I've had failures all along, but nothing that they caught me like that. With it. But I also had I was on vacation and I came back that day, and that's when that happened. But I had conversations with my wife during the vacation, and we were talking about how the relationship wasn't working with me and my boss, that we weren't getting along. And my wife said, she's like, you're really unhappy with it too. So why are you still doing it? And I said, well, I'm trying to make a difference. I'm trying to do some better things for folks and offer a different perspective. My whole career has basically been in patrol. So everything I do is with a lens on the person who's going to go out and answer that 911 call. Where my boss had come up through a different path and was more into collaborative policing and outreach and things along those lines. And what extra and different things could we put together rather than just impact the patrol officers? So kind of two different veins of what we were looking at. But she had said, well, it's probably time that you just didn't do that job anymore. You went back to where you actually can make a difference in your own mind and do good stuff. So it wasn't a complete surprise to me that that had happened. I knew it was gonna, at some point. I thought I had about 6 months than I did. But that's kind of where that ended up. So one of the things I looked at afterwards, because I was trying to mentor some sergeants that were becoming lieutenants and some officers that were becoming sergeants, is I put together kind of a paper of my leadership failures, is what I call them. And things where I've done over the years, from being the person in charge, who's called the PIC for McDonald's, and I was the shift supervisor, going back to my leadership back then, or in the 5th grade where I was a patrol captain for our safety patrol, all the way to my current position, and looking at things where I was like, hey, I really could have done better in this instance. And, why did I fail? And then what was behind that failure? So, things of like one of the things I talked about is having a clear chain of command. Now, I don't believe in decisions by committee. I think you can kill, it's stagnant, and it really stops your progress. Now, I think everybody should be involved, and I think you need to hear and listen to people. But at the end of the day, there's always one decision maker. And, people will say, hey, everything's done by committee here. I don't care, XYZ company. I don't know if it would be Starbucks, Microsoft, you pick any company in the world you want. And they say, hey, we always do this by committee. And I always say, well, that's great, but here's why you really don't do that. I said, when you sit in a room, who's the first person to speak? Who's the last person to speak? And who does everybody look at when they speak? That's the person who's in charge. So there's always somebody in charge, right? Who's going to say, okay, this is what we're going to do. And so really making sure that people kind of understand, like, hey, there is a hierarchy. Doesn't mean we're not collaborative. Doesn't mean we don't work together. But there is a hierarchy when things need to happen. We'd made a decision to merge kind of 3 units here. They were our data folks and stuff. And so I'd taken who I thought was the best person and made them a manager, and then folded all these units under. The boss, the chief, was with me, and some other folks were, and we said, yep, this is what we're going to do. And then I went to DC for something. I come back and I see an email saying, congratulations to this other person. And they've now promoted him to be on the same level as the manager I promoted, and pulled his data unit out. And I was like, what happened here? In the 2 days I was gone. And so I went to the boss and I said, hey, this person did this. Did you approve it? And she was like, no, I didn't approve it. And I said, well, I didn't approve it either. So how did this happen? And she's like, well, it was just them running with scissors, the kind of old phrase. And I said, okay, well, I'm going to go change it back. I'm going to go fix this. And I was told, no, leave it alone. It's done. Just don't make waves with it now. But what it really kind of showed me with that issue there, was understanding like our lanes. And it doesn't mean that you're always going to stay in your lane, because you're going to go outside of it. But at least when you do, you are. And that's the most important thing. When you bump into somebody else's lane, that like, hey, I need to call Chris and I need to talk to him because this is going to impact him with this as well. And people understand their roles and their responsibilities within the framework of where they work. You always want to still come up with new ideas. You still want to see where the impacts are that you can have. But everybody has to understand that we all play a pivotal role. And then how do we work together with it? And a lot of that is just having that really clear chain of command, so everybody understands, hey, what can I do on my own? What do I need permission for? And then who do I go to get certain things with that? And then just kind of following up with some of those things. I wrote a new policy, and I'd given it to an assistant chief below me and said, hey, go take this to the officers, read it with them, punch holes in it and bring it back to me. And they brought it back and they said, hey, it's the greatest thing since sliced bread. You're good to go. I'm like, okay, great, sure, all right. So publish it. And then I go meet with the officers, and they're like, yeah, we have a lot of questions about your policy. And I was like, well, why didn't you tell them before I wrote it? Because that's what I said. Well, we never saw it till now. I was like, what do you mean you didn't see it till now? I sent this down to you guys 2 weeks ago. So I call up the assistant chief. I'm like, what happened? He's like, well, we thought that it would just be better if just the commander and I read it. And I was like, well, that doesn't really make sense to me, because one, I told you what I wanted. So you should have this real understanding of like, I'm the boss and I've told you this is what you need to do. But beyond that, he needed to have the understanding of his role and his impact below him as well. And that was kind of lost with that. One of the things that I think is really important as a leader is, once you've delegated your roles and everybody knows that, is then empower your people to work within those roles and work beyond them. There's 10 right ways to do something. Just because it's not yours doesn't make it wrong. And so looking at those things and saying, hey, that was a good idea. I may not have done it the same way, but you really got to the mission accomplishment that we needed, the things that we wanted to do. And so empowering those people, and then when they make mistakes, you know, you own those mistakes, right? As a leader. And I'm not talking about the person who, you know, runs way outside the lines and, you know, is doing criminal stuff or really, really, you know, silly stuff, and they know it's wrong. I'm just talking about the people who made a decision and that decision didn't turn out to be the right one. And there was impacts and different things along those lines. Those you own. And I always used to tell people, I was like, never come into my office and tell me I did this or I did that. Because I know for the most part, you didn't do it, right? It was your team of folks who did it. So, you know, they're the ones you should be giving the praise and the glory to. Also, don't come into my office and say, well, Bob messed this up or Tim messed this up, right? It's a we, right? It's a, hey, it's either me or we. Hey, you know, I gave direction and it got messed up and it was on me because I didn't give clear enough direction. I didn't follow up. I wasn't there for this kind of stuff, right? You take the person to task individually, but you don't allow, you know, the higher ups to take that person to task for a meaningful mistake, right? Something that they meant. I had a commander here who used to always talk about mistakes of the heart and mistakes of the mind. And he said, mistakes of the heart are when you're trying to do a good thing, but it just didn't go right. He says, I'll take those all day. A mistake of the mind is when you intentionally set out to do something wrong, and you're always going to get in trouble. We'll never accept those types of mistakes. But you have to create this culture where your folks feel empowered to actually try something. When I ran the anti-crime teams, I said, look, we're going to do an operation every week. I want an operation on the board. I said, I don't care what it is. We can dress up like rubber chickens and go buy dope. It's fine with me. We will try anything as long as it's not illegal, immoral, or against our policies. And if it doesn't work, we just don't do it again. Or if it works, let's do it again. But I was always challenging them to come up with some new idea, some new way of looking at things and dealing with things with that.
Can I
And
break
then
in there
working
and ask you a question real quick on that? You talked about ownership, and you know, you've listed several instances where you've had some bad news given to you, and kind of how you survive that. For new leaders coming up, what is the best advice you give them, and how to survive that adversity? How to survive that bad news? You know, oftentimes, I think a lot of times it comes down to immaturity, but you get that bad news, and you want to take your ball and go home. How is it for you that you've developed yourself in a way that, and I think you use the word ownership, if you want to dive into that a little bit more, and how that may incorporate dealing with that adversity and winning that moment?
Yeah, I think, you know, a lot of it is how you set yourself up in the beginning when you go into these different roles and you think about what you're doing and why are you doing it, is huge, right? What's your why? You know, and it can be all sorts of things. You know, I'm not going to say doing it for yourself is a bad thing. It's the wrong thing, and doing it for others is always the best thing, right? There's a variety of reasons that you go into these different roles. And so you have to accept those and understand that we all have limitations, and there's times and places where you're just simply not the best choice for those types of things. And you have to own the fact that, you know, where you're good and where you're not good at. I could never work in internet crimes against children. I don't care, you know, how much you paid me. I don't care whatever you were going to give me. There is just absolutely no way I would ever survive an assignment like that. I've never sought one out, and when it's been talked about for me, I tell people absolutely not. It is the worst thing in the world for you to give me. But I look at things where, you know, the SWAT team, the harbor unit, some of the special units, the protest activities were things that I have a lot of experience, a lot of knowledge for. And I'm happy to serve in those capacities and work with those things with it. So you have to kind of know your strengths and your weaknesses, right? Sun Tzu, The Art of War, right? To develop yourself. And then beyond that, understanding that most of the times the decisions aren't personal, right? I mean, there are times where you just don't, your personality clashes, but at the same point, even when your personality clashes, they're not demoting you because they don't like you necessarily, or they're not transferring you, or you're not reeling into a lot of these things. A lot of it is you don't get along, so you're not going to move the ball forward. Right, you're not going to be able to accomplish the things that need to be accomplished, taking that next step, because you're going to be at odds with different things. So understanding that, you know, it's really not personal in the end. Now, if they came up and said, "Hey, Mark, you're short, you're getting demoted," okay, well, we'll have to deal with that on that end. Nobody under 6 foot can have this job, whatever you want to call it. Then, yeah, it might be a little more personal than that. But it's like, look, we just don't see eye to eye. We don't have a direction that we're going in. And so, in trying the best that you can to not take it personal. Now, we all do. We're humans, and we have feelings. Um, but really kind of talking to yourself about, okay, what just happened and why did it happen? And what part did I play in that? With that. My boss would send me down because he's like, hey, there's a problem in this area. You need to go fix it. So I would go down and I would fix the problem. And then they would come back and complain. But I never went in and said, hey, the boss told me there's a problem here. I'm going to fix it. I would go in and say, okay, hey, what's the problem? Let's listen to it. What are your ideas? Where are we going? Okay, here's what we're going to do, and we're going to move forward with it. And so I think sometimes, for me, it was like I didn't maybe explain myself well enough to people and created some of that adversity. And so to them, it may have felt a little more personal in that sense. But really, for me, being demoted, I had to take that look and say, okay, what did I do right? What did I do wrong? And where am I most effective? Um, and I think that's one of those keys too. Find a place where you're happy and you're doing good work. You have to walk through the doors when they open for you. So you might leave that job and go somewhere else, but you can always come back to that space. And that to me was probably one of the biggest saving graces for me is like, I loved where I came from. So I wasn't upset about going back to it.
You had brought up a little bit earlier about, and I think it was your lieutenant, an environment where there's 10 different ways to do things, and it doesn't necessarily have to be your way. But when they maybe doesn't conform to exactly what you want, you use that mentorship to try to guide them back on, which in some ways I think helps deal with that adversity and maybe getting some of that bad news or accountability and ownership later. Did you have people like that? Is that how you kind of got there? Did you have people set you up that type of way? Because, as leaders, we sometimes have to create an environment where it's okay for them to fail and to foster an environment where you kind of give them permission to fail as long as it doesn't violate those 3 things that you said, right? Law, morals, and your policies. Is that how you kind of got set up, or is that something that you developed on your own, kind of naturally coming up through the military and your early ranks in the police world?
Yeah. So, I mean, it came a lot from all over. I've developed it a little more and more as I go along. But I had some really good supervisors in law enforcement. I had great supervisors in the military. I had good supervisors back in McDonald's back in the day type thing. And my parents really pushed us to try different things and to do different things, and that it was okay to fail. You can never quit. So if I signed up for football and I didn't like it and I wasn't good, I didn't get to quit halfway through the season. I had to play the season out. And still be there. I was never allowed to quit, but it was always about like, hey, go out there and try it. You may not be good at it, but hey, give it a shot and see where you're at. Gather that information. But a lot of it was through mentorship with it, and a lot of discussions with folks like, hey, I'm thinking about this. What do you think would be? And one of the things that always has come back to me, years ago, I had somebody tell me, it's like, well, just try to think about the unintended consequences. Don't always just focus on the decision you're making, because most of the time you're going to make the right one. Most people will make the right decision, but what ends up happening is there's a ton of unintended consequences that go along with those decisions. And so you need to look at some of that, because how you make the decision might be a little different with it. But yeah, at the end of the day, it was mostly because I had really good folks that took me under their wing and kind of helped me along.
And how do you kind of foster that? Because you've always been a guy in my 20 years around you. You've always been a guy that people either feel comfortable or have said that, hey, man, that guy's door is open all the time and he's always willing to help you out. How do you go from an environment, there's places across the country, whether it be in law enforcement or corporate America, where they just got promoted into a position. The current environment isn't so warming. How do you make that transition so that it does become more warming and encouraging people to kind of step outside the lines just a little bit to try to grow? And there could be consequences, but you can minimize a lot of those things as long as it's not mistake of the heart, or the mind, if you will.
Yeah. So I think the first thing you have to understand and really take to heart is your position doesn't exist to benefit you. Your position exists to benefit others. That's the whole thing with it. As a supervisor, the reason I'm a supervisor is because I need to watch over the folks below me, empower them, give them the tools and resources they need to actually accomplish their mission. At the same point, I'm taking the mission from above me and saying, okay, how do I make this mission actually fit with how we actually work? One of the things that would happen is you'd say, like, hey, I want to stop the protesters at this block. Well, that block is 5 different streets into it, and I would need 30 people. I've only got 10. So it's like, no, I'm not stopping there. I'm going to go a block down and I'll stop them there for you, right? So how do you take the resources, the things that you actually have, and accomplish the mission that the boss is giving you with that? So that is one of the biggest things for me, is understanding that, a lot of people have that surprise where they move up and find out that it's actually more work than it was at the other level, and it should be. And if it's not, you're doing it wrong, because you have so much more on your plate that you should be looking at. Yes, you got a lot more email, you have a lot more paperwork, but really your whole job now is the folks that are working for you and focusing on them, and spending time with them. So that's one of the biggest things that you really have to come to terms with in your mind, is that you exist for them. And so open door policies are great, right? And you have it at times where people will be like, hey, coming in for silly things or things that aren't really germane, but understand that those are important to those people too. So you're going to have to spend a little bit of time on that. But you're really going to foster that environment where people aren't afraid to come to you. I had at times I would have people from other squads call me and say, hey, I can't say it over the radio, but could you swing by my call? I really need something, a little bit of help with this, and my sergeant isn't available. And so I would go. So you really have to invest in your folks and understand that your time is finite. And so you have to raise up the next person to take your job. Your number one job, whenever you get a job, is to find your replacement first, right? And then train them up, because you won't be there for forever. So find your guiding role. And I see there's a hand up, so I'll stop for a minute. Mr. Curtis?
Thank you.
Paul, welcome to be on here, man. I'm glad to see you, man.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I want to go back to something you said earlier, Mark, and that was in regard to what job you wanted versus what job you had. And the way I have come to deal with that is to make a list of the things that I am truly passionate about. And the reason for the passion is, you are passionate about what you're doing, you tend to be in the top 1% of the people who succeed. And I'm not talking about material possessions and all that kind of stuff. I'm talking about relationships. And so times you have to make what you're passionate about, prioritize the list. Other times, and it sounds to me like you already know what you're passionate about, and that's being and the desk all day, not being a paper pusher. That doesn't mean you don't push the streets, but because you do. But usually I'm some Dairy Queen or something, write my reports there. But I think that when you view it from a standpoint of what you're passionate about, you will know you're in the right place, and I believe you found that, and you've known for a long time that that's what you wanted to do, and whatever position or role you're given in that, it's a different issue. And there's the issue of economics. There's the issue of retirement. And I don't know how it is for you folks, but down here in California, retirement is based on your last 10 quarters. And it's the PERS system, personnel system. And that's something you pay into the state every month, and they invest it and make millions of dollars and then pay it all out. Well, I shouldn't say they pay it all out. I'm not sure where some of it goes, but in any event. And the other thing that you touched on is the issue of growth. And for me, is about a couple of things. One is expansion of your knowledge set, and the other is your mindset. And when I get down in the dumps, and lots of you have heard me say this, but I'll say it again. When I get down in the dumps, I sit down and make a list of all the things I'm grateful for. And I look at that list and I realize, you know, I don't care about the guy who complained come to work on account of he broke a fingernail. Okay. I'm just not interested. And so part of that process is learning how to say no. Mm-hmm. Because it's not something that fits into your goals, your purpose, your why, what you're passionate about, any of that. And so if you have this plan, and it sounds like you do, then look at everything that comes your way and say, how does this fit into what I'm looking for? And if it doesn't, refer it to somebody else. Yeah. So anyway.
Thanks, Paul. And I've got a follow-up question on that, Gigi. How do you, at what point did you figure out that whether you get a minimal punishment, whether it be a letter of reprimand, a suspension, a demotion, or whatever, how do you come to a place, or how did you come to a place where you figure out that that's not the end of the game? That there's still, you know, that may end one chapter, but now you can embrace something else and still have an opportunity to have a full, successful career because, and not that it's over because you got a counseling statement or some days off. What's the best healthy way that you figured out how to deal with that stuff, grieve the moment, and then be able to move on?
So when Chesty Puller said you're not a true Marine until you've gone to NJP. So, you know,
that's non-judicial punishment for those that don't know.
Yeah, yeah, you get in trouble for some things. So yeah, I think, you know, you got to laugh about the things, and we're all going to make mistakes. We're all going to get yelled at. We're going to, you know, some are bigger than others, and you get different things with it. But they don't define you. They don't define your career with where you work. And so the things is you take them and you got to take them as a learning experience, right? Again, looking at where it went wrong. You know, you can say where you failed, where it went wrong, however you want to term it. I always look at it as where I failed, because I always like to internalize it and look at it from my point of view of, like, you know, for stepping outside and saying, okay, hey, you know, what did I see? So, you know, really taking them as a learning point.
Almost semblance of ownership.
Yeah. And then just understand you still got a lot to offer. You still got a lot of time on, you know, if you're, you know, the second to last day before you retire, you make the mistakes. Well, okay, maybe you're not going to really worry too much about it. But the reality is most of us make our mistakes in those first couple of years. And then with each new position, in those first learning years are where we're making our mistakes. And so understanding you still got a ton more time out there to do some things. There's a huge more amount of impact that you can make and do. So you take it, you learn from it, and you go, oh, okay, yeah, I could have done better here. Sometimes it's outside of your control, realistically with it. You know, that it really doesn't matter. You just got caught up in something and that, and really turned to sour grapes. It really can when you look at it. Where I've been disciplined before, I knew I did wrong. You know, I knew it, I admitted it. You know, I don't do anything that I won't admit to. And so it was like, you know, I didn't report something. I investigated myself, unfounded it. And then they called a year later and complained. And I got called in, gave them all my investigation, and they said, well, more of an investigation than we would, but because you didn't give it to us, you're in trouble. And I was like, okay, I'll take my punishment. That's fine. Um, because I knew what I'd done was, in a sense, wrong type thing. But at the end of the day, um, you have to accept that when you work outside of your policy, where you commit those infractions out there in life, that you just own them and move on, because it's just a blip. It's nothing. I mean, you think about it, if you have children, right? If you tell little Timmy, hey, go pick up your toys, and they miss one, you're like, hey, you missed one, go back. Should little Timmy have a bad day for the rest of the day? No, right? Because
No.
we're learning and we're moving on from those things. And so, unfortunately, it's a little more personal and a little bigger of an impact on us when we have these things. And
Sure.
really, at the end of the day, just understanding that, hey, you still got a long way to go, right? So you stumble and fall in the first, 100 meters of a mile race. You don't quit. You don't give up. You just
Yeah.
get back up and you just keep moving.
So you're not
Movement is life.
necessarily minimizing it, but you're also not letting it define you. Like you said, you're realizing, okay, I need to take accountability for this, but now I can still move on, not letting it define me, not completely dismissing it, own whatever part that you can own, and then try to move on from that, is what I hear you saying.
Yeah, and it comes in a variety of different ways. Years ago, I had a commander who was talking at our class, and he was, oh, good Lord. He said he was 5'2", but I think he was 4'10". And he says, if they came to me and said, hey, the sheriff comes and says, hey, we don't have any 4'10" lieutenants, so I'm going to promote you. He's like, should I tell the sheriff, no, I don't want it? And he's like, no, you take it. But then you prove to them why you were the best choice. You prove to them why you're in those positions. And that's that whole thing about mistakes too, and when getting in trouble. I want to prove to them that that doesn't define me, that I'm still out there doing my job. They're paying me. I should be doing my job, right? I'm trying to make a difference. That's why I got into this role. I should be doing my job and doing that. So just because I got yelled at or got a letter or something demoted, um, doesn't stop me from completing my why, right?
Love it.
And we can say, well, it's the worst thing in the world. Throw my sucker in the dirt and that. But the reality, you're just harming yourself, and you're harming the people that work for you or work around you.
Last question. I'm going to open it up for questions from everybody else. Would you say that you have to be able to give yourself some grace, because there's no way that you make it through any career without making mistakes that you have to be accountable for?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I always used to open my classes when I talk to folks, and I would say, look, I'm married and I have children, teenagers. I wake up wrong and I go to bed wrong, right? It is the story of my life. Do not worry about being wrong. I've made more mistakes than probably everybody on this screen here put all together, right? I own that. I don't worry about it. I keep moving forward with that. So, you just got to sometimes just chuckle and laugh about these things. And you just, you just got to move. Life's too short to be upset all the time about these types of things. And if you find you're in a place like that, tactical withdrawal is always a valid option. People forget, and to Paul's point earlier, if you're not enjoying where you're at, if you're not, if you're not contributing, you're not having those impacts of those things, then find something else. Find something that really does fill up your buckets. It can be within the same department or same, um, wherever you work, same company or something totally different. But you gotta figure that out for yourself. And if you're not happy, don't just stick around and not be happy.
I love it. Thank you so much for your openness and your vulnerability. Again, you and I have had these conversations for hours. I love being able to spin these things off, because when we do, it's another pathway to solving whatever problem we have currently as leaders or inspiring leaders. So again, thank you for taking this time to be here. I'd like to open it up if any of you guys have any questions for Lieutenant Garth-Green. Barry.
Yeah, Mark, I mean, when you were talking about that demotion and the way it happened, I mean, in working, I worked with veterans for about 22 years. And the thing that really seemed to kick in with people was that moral injury. And, it's very hard to reason a moral injury away. It kind of gets entangled almost in your nervous system. I always say it's almost in the marrow of your bones.
Yeah.
And I wonder what would you recommend in your experience, what are the strategies that help people heal? Because you can't think your way out of a moral injury. It's how you heal yourself out of a moral injury.
Yeah, and I think, you know, you have to go back to the why. You know, why are you doing these things in what I mean, after 2020, you look at policing changed dramatically. And just the anger and the hatred and the visceral you know, just horrible comments that were made to the officers throughout the nation and all these different things. Um, you know, and it really turned their why upside down because people always thought, well, hey, you know, I'm out here, I'm doing good work, I'm helping the public, this is what I want to do. And all of a sudden, the public turned on us and said, no, you're the bad guy. And so, from being raised, you know, as little, watching, you know, Car 54, Adam 12, Emergency, all these different things, you know, where cops were the heroes. And so you believe that, that you're making a difference. And then for suddenly for that to be shaken at its core with you really I think is really the downfall of policing today, where we have that's the reasons we have problems retaining people, the reasons we have problems hiring people, and along those lines from that moral injury. And you're right, you can't really reason yourself out of that type of thing. And I think really it has to, you have to go back to your why and try to center yourself back from that. And then that healing can sometimes take place in where you get promoted again, or you know, something works for you. um, I think a lot of it is coming together with others and talking with them about kind of what happened, really, you know, those peer support groups, mentors, coaches, things along those lines is huge uh, from that. Because yeah, you're right, it's an injury no different than, you know, if I break my leg or something, it takes time to heal. And I need to go to a specialist sometimes to that heal, that and not necessarily mean a trained doctor. I think those are great too. Sometimes that specialist can be somebody who's walked that path or is walking that path with you currently, and working through that um, with it. And really, you just got to go back to your internal self and really figure out why you do what you do, where you want to be with it, along those lines. And it doesn't always work. I mean, that's the reality of it. Sometimes we really do need that professional help, and we can't be afraid to go get it.
Yeah, you
And
know,
in that, are you
thanks.
asking yourself, like, was it worth it? Is that part of that process? Was my job that I do worth that injury, and is it worth going on?
Yeah, and Chris, it's also, I think, that moral stuff, it's the kind of stuff that whispers to you around midnight. And I think often you've got that choice. Will you learn to decide which part of you you're going to listen to at some point? And you know what you pay attention to grows.
Oh yeah.
So, so it's a hard one because you can trail it to your grave. It's just how much
100%.
strength you give it.
Yeah, how much, and I agree with you, Barry. You know, it's I always use the phrase, you know, in the quiet's when the voices come.
It does, eh?
You know, and so you have to be on guard.
Yep.
100%. Awesome. Great question, Barry. That was a fantastic question. Jim.
Yeah, I was just gonna, because I ended my career in that scenario of some of that moral stuff. And when I share with people about you know, kind of that journey, I use a slide in my slide deck that says, "How do you know when?" That's all it says.
Yeah.
And you can add to that from, you know, whatever, right? But it was, how do you know when? And I basically finished that statement with recognizing when the situation you're in is impeding your ability to carry out your purpose, and you no longer have the passion that you had for what you're doing.
Yeah.
And you can look at that as whether it's a job or whether it's, you know, some other situation, right? As soon as there's that collision taking place, where those things are not able to occur, you're not able to kind of continue on that path, it's time to make a change, right? And whether that change is exiting or, you know, fighting or, you know, whatever, you know, however you have to do it, but it's like that's the moment, right? Is you need to be able to look at the impact that it's having in that moment on those two things, I think.
Yeah, no, totally agree. And I used to have a phrase was given me a long time ago, and it was talking more about relationships and friends and stuff. And they said, you know, every friend you have is in your in your life for a reason, a season, or for life. And I think, you know, with jobs and things along those lines, the positions that we hold, the things that are impacting us fall into those three categories at times. I firmly believe I was probably getting too big for my britches, and so I needed a little bit of a humbling experience, and I have a lot of faith. I'm a man of faith, and so, you know, I I was humbled too, right? And I had to take that back and laugh about it to myself. But yeah, you know, everything's always evolving, and at some point, like you say, you know, it just becomes um, you know, somewhat, maybe the wrong word, but untenable really for us. And you got to know at that point, hey, you know, this is more detrimental to my life and to me than it is actually worthwhile.
Yeah, and it, you know, sometimes, you know, for me personally, right, it was, as I look back on it, it was something that had gone on for quite some time, you know, until I finally reached that threshold of, you know, and then when I crossed the threshold and I started looking back, it's like, oh yeah, you know, here were all the signs, you know, that I probably should have done something about this, you know, a while ago.
Yeah. Oh, that comes with this lot. And I know we're running out of a little bit of time here too.
Yep.
I just wanted to leave with just kind of two thoughts that kind of rule my life as I look at things too. And one is that your greatest strength can be your greatest weakness. Um, you know, we always think like, you know, whatever I do great at is always the best positive, but it also can be really a bad thing. Like for me, um, I subscribe to the Colin Powell School of decision making. You get about 70% of the information, you have to make a decision, right? You can't wait for 100%. So I've always had the ability to look at a situation, size it up, and to make a decision and then go on. Not that they were always the right decisions, but at least they were some decision. Um, and then, but what I found over time too is sometimes that quick decision making was problematic for other people. And so it created a bit of a weakness. So when we look at our great strengths that we have, whatever they may be within sports or work or life or whatever, you know, take a look because it might be one of the things that's really impeding you in other areas of that. And then the last thing I'll say that I subscribe to is doing the right thing is the best thing. Doing the wrong thing is the next best thing. And doing nothing is the most absolute worst thing that you can do. And by wrong thing, I don't mean you intentionally set out to do something wrong. I mean, you went left and you ran into a closed door. So you got to readjust and you got to go right. But movement is life. And we just have to do those things. So thank you for your time. I appreciate it. Hopefully, it was worthwhile for you. If not, send me an email or whatever. Let me know because I hate wasting people's time. But I just really thank you for the questions and just your time and attention.
Thank you. And Gigi, if I'm going to have Sarah kind of close this out. So thank you again for being here. And for those that are going to watch in the future, remember, leadership is a quirky thing. And these titles don't define who you are as a leader. You define those ranks. So never get tied up in that title. Sarah?
Just really quickly, Lieutenant Green, what a pleasure to have you on. In the spirit of Paul Curtis, I really have a lot of gratitude. I think hearing the spirit behind everything that you shared today is just everything right about those who protect us. And I can totally see why you and Chris get along great. So thank you so much. And Chris, thank you so much for facilitating this and inviting Lieutenant Green on.
It's always an honor. Thank you. Thank you for your time, Mark.